Chapter 7. "Stacy, go bring me your coat," Mama said a few days later as we gathered around the fire after supper. "I've got time to take up the sleeves now." "Uh-oh," exclaimed Christopher John, then immediately opened his reader as Mama looked down at him. Little man cupped his hand and whispered to me, "Boy, now he's going to get it." That's all right, Mama," stuttered Stacy. "The coat's all right like it is." Mama opened her sewing box. "It's not all right. Now go get it for me." Stacy stood up and started slowly toward his room. Little man, Christopher John, and I watched him closely, wondering what he was going to do. He actually went into the room, but was gone only a moment before he reappeared and nervously clutched the back of his chair. "I ain't got the coat, Mama," he said. "Not got the coat?" cried Big Ma. Uncle Hammer looked up sharply from his paper, but remained silent. "Stacy," Mama said irritably, "bring me that coat, boy." "But, Mama, I really ain't got it. I gave it to TJ." "TJ?" Mama exclaimed. "Yes, ma'am, Mama," Stacy answered, then went on hurriedly as Mama's eyes glittered with rising anger. "The coat was too big for me, and TJ said it made me look like a preacher, and he said that it fit him just right. He'd take it off my hands till I grow into it. Then that way all the guys would stop laughing at me and calling me preacher." He paused, waiting for someone to speak, but the only sound was a heavy breathing and the crackle of burning hickory. Then, seeming more afraid of the silence than putting his neck further into the noose, he added, "But I didn't give it to him for good, Mama. Just lent it to him till he'd get big enough for it, and then—" Stacy's voice faded into an inaudible whisper as Mama slowly put the sewing box on the table behind her. I thought she was heading for the wide leather strap hanging in the kitchen, but she did not rise. In quiet anger she glared at Stacy and admonished, "In this house we do not give away what loved ones give to us. Now go bring me that coat." Backing away from her anger, Stacy turned to leave, but Uncle Hammer stopped him. "No," he said. "Leave the coat where it is." Mama turned bewildered toward Uncle Hammer. "Hammer, what are you saying? That's the best coat Stacy's ever had, and probably ever will have as long as he lives in this house. David and I can't afford a coat like that." Uncle Hammer leaned back in his chair, his eyes cold on Stacy. "Seems to me if Stacy's not smart enough to hold on to a good coat, he don't deserve it. As far as I'm concerned, TJ can keep that coat permanently. At least he knows a good thing when he sees it." "Hammer," Big Ma said, "let the boy go get the coat. That TJ probably told him all sorts. Well, ain't Stacy got a brain? What the devil should he care what TJ thinks or TJ says? Who is this TJ anyway? Does he put clothes on Stacy's back or food in front of him?" Uncle Hammer stood and walked over to Stacy, and Little Man, Christopher John, and I followed him fearfully with our own eyes. "I suppose if TJ told you it was summertime out there, and you should run buck naked down the road because everybody else was doing it, you'd do that too, huh?" No, sir," Stacy replied, looking at the floor. "Now you hear me good on this. Look at me when I talk to you, boy." Immediately, Stacy raised his head and looked at Uncle Hammer. "If you ain't got the brains of a flea to see that this TJ fellow made a fool of you, then you'll never get anywhere in this world. It's tough out there, boy. And as long as there are people, there's going to be somebody trying to take what you've got and trying to drag you down. It's up to you whether or not you let them. Now it seems to me you wanted the coat when I gave it to you, ain't that right?" Stacy managed a shaky, "Yes, sir." "And anybody with any sense would know it's a good thing, ain't that right?" This time Stacy could only nod. "Then if you want something, and it's a good thing, and you got it in it the right way, you better hang on to it and don't let nobody talk you out of it. You care what a lot of useless people say about you'll never get anywhere, 'cause there's a lot of folks don't want you to make it. You understand what I'm telling you?" "Yes, sir, Uncle Hammer," Stacy stammered. Uncle Hammer turned then and went back to his paper without having laid a hand on Stacy, but Stacy shook visibly from the encounter. Christopher John, Little Man, and I exchanged apprehensive glances. I don't know what they were thinking, but I, for one, was deciding right then and there not to do anything to rub Uncle Hammer the wrong way. I had no intention of ever facing a tongue-lashing like that. Papa's bottom-warming whippings were quite enough for me, thank you. The last days of school before Christmas seemed interminable. Each night I fell asleep with the hope that the morning would bring Papa, and each morning he wasn't there, I trudged to school, consoling myself that he would be home when I returned. But the days passed, prickly cold and windy, and he did not come. Added to the misery of the waiting and the cold was Lillian Jean, who managed to flounce past me with a superior smirk twice that week. I had already decided that she had 2 flounces too many, but since I hadn't yet decided how to handle the matter, I postponed doing anything until after I had had a chance to talk with Papa about the whole strawberry business. I knew perfectly well that he would not tear out of the house after Mr. Sims' Uncle Hammer had done, for he always took time to think through any move he made, but he would certainly advise me on how to handle Lillian Jean. Then, too, there was TJ, who, although was not really my problem, was so obnoxiously flaunting Stacy's wool coat during these cold days that I had just about decided to deflate him at the same time I took care of Lillian Jean. Ever since the night Mr. Avery had brought him to the house to return the coat, and he had been told by Uncle Hammer and a faltering Stacy that the coat was his, TJ had been more unbearable than usual. He now praised the coat from the wide tips of its lapel to the very edges of the deep hem. No one had ever had a finer coat. No one had ever looked better in such a coat. No one could ever hope to have such a coat again. Stacy was restrained from plugging TJ's mouth by Uncle Hammer's principle that a man did not blame others for his own stupidity. He learned from his mistake and became stronger for it. I, however, was not so restrained, and as far as I was concerned, if TJ kept up with his coat business, he could just hit the dirt at the same time as Miss Lillian Jean. The day before Christmas I awoke to the soft murmuring of quiet voices gathered in the midnight blackness of morning. Big Ma was not beside me, and without a moment's doubt I knew why she was gone. Jumping from bed, my feet barely hitting the deerskin rug, I rushed into Mama's room. "Oh, Papa," I cried, "I knew it was you." "Ah, there's my Cassie girl," Papa laughed, standing to catch me as I leapt into his arms. By the dawn, the house smelled of Sunday, chicken frying, bacon sizzling, and smoked sausages baking. By evening it reeked of Christmas. In the kitchen, sweet potato pies, egg custard pies, and rich butter pound cakes cooled. A gigantic coon, which Mr. Morris and Uncle Hammer and Stacy had secured in a night's hunt, baked in a sea of onions, garlic, and fat orange and yellow yams, and a choice sugar-cured ham brought from the smokehouse, awaiting its turn in the oven. In the heart of the house, where we had gathered after supper, freshly cut branches of long-needled pines lay over the fireplace mantel, adorned by winding vines of winter holly and bright red Christmas berries. And in the fireplace itself, in a black pan set on a high wire rack, peanuts roasted over the hickory fire as the waning light of day swiftly deepened into a fine velvet night, speckled with white forerunners of a coming snow, and the warm sound of husky voices and rising laughter mingled in tales of sorrow and happiness of days past but not forgotten. "Them watermelons of old man Ellis's seem like they just naturally taste better than anybody else's," said Papa. "And old Hammer and me, we used to sneak up there whenever I'd get hot. You couldn't hardly move, and take a couple of them melons on down to the pond and let 'em get real chilled. Then talk about eating! We did some kind of good eating." "Papa, you was stealing?" asked an astonished little man. Although he usually strongly disapproved of being held, he was now reclining comfortably in Papa's lap. "Well," Papa said, "not exactly. What we do was exchange one of them melons from our patch for his. Of course it was still wrong for us to do it, but at the same time it seemed all right. Problem was, though," laughed Uncle Hammer, "old man Ellis grew them old fat green round watermelons, and ours was long and striped." "Mr. Ellis was always right particular about his melons," interjected Papa. "He took the longest time to figure out what we was up to, but Lord, when he did! You should have seen us run," Uncle Hammer said, standing. "He shot one hand against and past the other. Man! Was we gone! And that old man was right behind us, with the hickory stick hitting us upside the head." "Owie! Ow! That old man could run!" Papa cried. "I didn't know nobody's legs could move that fast." Big Ma chuckled. "And as I recalls, your papa about wore y'all out when Mr. Ellis told him what y'all been up to. Course, you know all them Ellises was natural born runners. Y'all remember Mr. Ellis's brother Tom Lee? Well, one time, Through the evening, Papa and Uncle Hammer and Big Ma, Mr. Morrison and Mama lent us their memories, acting out their tales with stage-worthy skills, imitating the characters in voice, manner, and action so well that the listeners held their sides with laughter. It was a good, warm time. But as the night deepened and the peanuts in the pan grew shallow, the voices grew hushed, and Mr. Morrison said, "They come down like ghosts, that Christmas of '76. Them was hard times, like now. My family was livin' in a shanty town right outside of Shreveport. Reconstruction was just about over then, and them northern soldiers was tired of being in the South, and they didn't hardly care about no black folks in Shantytown. And them southern whites, they was tired of the northern soldiers and free Negroes, and they was trying to turn things back round to how they used to be. And the colored folks, well, we was just tired. Warn't hardly no work, and during them years I s'pose it was just about as hard being free as it was being a slave. That night they came I can remember just as good. It was cold, so cold we had to huddle all against each other just trying to keep warm. And 2 boys, about 18 or 19, I reckon, come knocking on my daddy's door. They was scared clean out of their heads with fright. They just come back from Shreveport. Some white woman done accused them of molesting her, and they didn't know nowhere to run, so they come up to my daddy's, 'cause he had a good head and he was bigger and bigger than me. He was strong, too, so strong he could break a man's leg easily as if he was snapping a twig. I seen him do it that night, and the white folks were scared of him. But my daddy didn't hardly have time to finish hearing them boys' story when them devilish nightmen swept down." "Nightmen?" I echoed in a shrill, dry whisper. Stacy, sitting beside me on the floor, stiffened. Christopher John nudged me knowingly. The little man leaned forward on Papa's lap. "David," Mama started, but Papa enfolded her slender hand in his and said quietly, "These are things they need to hear, baby. It's their history." Mama sat back, her hand still in Papa's, her eyes wary. But Mr. Morrison seemed not to notice. "Swept down like locusts," he continued in a faraway voice. "Burst in on us with their rebel sabers, hacking and killing, burning us out. Didn't care who they killed. We warn't nothing to them, no better than dogs. Killed babies and old women, didn't matter." He gazed into the fire. "My sisters got killed in the fire, but my mama got me out." His voice faded and he touched the scars on his neck. "She tried to get back into the house to save the girls, but she couldn't." Them night men was all over her, and she threw me like I was a ball as hard as she could, trying to get me away from them. Then she fought like a wild thing right side my daddy. They was both of them from breeding stock, and they was strong like bulls." "Breeding stock?" I said. "What's that?" "Cassie, don't interrupt, Mr. Morrison," Mama said. But Mr. Morrison turned from the fire and explained. "Well, Cassie, during slavery there was some farms that mated folks like animals to produce more slaves. Breeding slaves brought a lot of money for them slave owners, especially after the government said they couldn't bring no more slaves from Africa, and they produced all kinds of slaves to sell on the block. And folks with enough money, white men and even free black men, could buy exactly what they wanted. My folks were bred for strength, like they's folks and they's grandfolks before them. Didn't matter none what they thought about the idea, didn't nobody care. But my mama and daddy, they loved each other, and they loved us children, and that Christmas they fought them demons out of hell like avenging angels of the Lord." He turned back toward the fire and grew very quiet. Then he raised his head and looked at us. "They died that night. Them night men killed 'em. Some folks tell me I can't remember what happened that Christmas. I wasn't hardly 6 years old, but I remembers all right. I makes myself remember." He grew silent again, and no one spoke. Big Ma poked absently at the red-eyed logs with the poker, but no one else stirred. Finally Mr. Morrison stood, wished us a good night, and left. Uncle Hammer stood also. "Guess I'll turn in too. It's near 1 o'clock." "Wait a while, Hammer," said Big Ma. "Now you and David both home, I gotta talk to y'all about the land."